your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this week. A judge has dismissed a court challenge that sought to overturn the current prorogation of Parliament. In a decision released Thursday, Federal Court Chief Justice Paul Crampton ruled that the applicants had failed to show that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had, quote, exceeded any of the limits of the Constitution when he advised the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament back in January. Two Nova Scotia men represented by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms had asked the court to declare the current prorogation illegal because there must be a reasonable justification for hitting the pause button. The judge disagreed with their arguments. U.S. President Donald Trump announced Friday that he might impose reciprocal tariffs on some Canadian goods as soon as the same day. This is the latest development in the trade war involving U.S. neighboring countries after a head-spinning week in which Trump imposed 25% tax on Mexican and Canadian goods and then delayed some of the levies for a month. Trump told reporters Friday that he would target Canadian lumber and dairy products, accusing Canada of taking advantage of American farmers by charging steep tariffs on the products coming in from the U.S. Earlier this week, however, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc said Canada has suspended a second wave of retaliatory tariffs after Trump signed an executive order to pause some of his tariffs on Canada until April the 2nd. Trump's on-again, off-again tariff threats have strained financial markets, lowered consumer confidence, and put many businesses into uncertainty. Even with a pause, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says retaliatory tariffs will remain in place until Trump drops the levies completely, adding he expects Canada and the U.S. to be in a trade war for the foreseeable future. He made the remark a day after Trump delayed tariffs for a month for vehicles coming through the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement on Trade. Trudeau confirmed Thursday that he won't be lifting any reciprocal levies if Trump leaves any tariffs on Canada.
Focus we have right now is on reducing the impacts of the tariffs. I can confirm that we will continue to be in a trade war that was launched by the United States for the foreseeable future. So Canadians should continue to buy Canadian, continue to stand up for each other, but we are trying to reduce the areas and the impact that these tariffs that the Americans are bringing in will have on Canadian workers. But Canada will continue to stand firm and unequivocal that as long as there are tariffs on us from the United States that are completely unjustified, we will be responding strongly.
And days earlier, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson said Ottawa is extending a tax break for those investing in critical mineral exploration. He says the 15% tax cut is being extended for 2 more years and is expected to free up $110 million to help develop mining sites, primarily in the north. Critical minerals have been a leading political issue in recent weeks after President Trump's repeated calls for Canada to become the 51st state. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was caught on a hot mic last month saying Trump's threat was a real thing tied to his administration's desire to access Canada's critical minerals. And there's also a possibility that Justin Trudeau may stay on as Prime Minister after a new leader is chosen this weekend. To talk more about this is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who sat down with BCN's Jeanette Rocher.
It's funny you ask because Trudeau was asked about that at his news conference on the tariffs, and he said that will be a discussion between himself and whoever wins the Liberal leadership. We're all assuming it's going to be Mark Carney, and that they'll have a discussion on that. One of the things that I've heard lately is that Trudeau may stay on and allow Carney just to focus on an election campaign as Liberal leader. You know, Trudeau stay as PM. I don't know how that would work, but this is, I'm told, part of the discussion in the Prime Minister's office. I'm also hearing an election call by March 16th, so a week after the Liberal leadership. They'll call an election. Voting would happen just after Easter. So Easter is April 20th this year. Easter Monday is technically a stat holiday, according to the federal government. So bureaucrats won't be working. That means you can't hold the election that day. It's got to be April 22nd. So watch for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but these are some of the discussions happening in Ottawa. Is Carney just focusing on an election campaign, Trudeau remaining PM, but an election call March 16th for a voting day of April 22nd.
Okay, and then speaking of Carney, Brian, you've obviously been pointing to several examples of him not exactly telling the truth, or in your words, outright lying. So what are some of the problems, in a nutshell, that you've seen with Carney?
Yeah, you're not allowed to say that someone's lying in Parliament. So you'll often see people come up with, oh, he's not familiar with the commandments. Meaning that they're not being truthful. Look, Carney has claimed that he helped balance the budget under Paul Martin, which he didn't do. He didn't work for Paul Martin. He didn't join the federal government until 2004 when Martin was PM, and 6 years after he balanced the budget. He's taking credit for Canada's response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Stephen Harper recently wrote an open letter saying he's taking credit for Jim Flaherty's work, and Jim Flaherty is long past and not around to defend himself. He claimed that Canada sells the United States almost all of their semiconductors, the computer chips that they rely on. We're less than 1% of all sales into the United States. On and on it goes. I mean, it's resulted in people claiming that Carney was a Roman emperor, that he was the first man in space, all these things, because he keeps claiming things, claiming credit for things that aren't true. And then when it comes to moving the headquarters of Brookfield Asset Management to New York City from Toronto, he claims he had nothing to do with it, except he did. He voted as chair of the board to make the move. So Mark Carney, he's not really familiar with the truth.
The federal government is trying to secure extensions through to 2031 for its national $10 a day childcare program. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced 11 provinces and territories have agreed to extend the deals. The agreements give those jurisdictions billions of dollars to cut childcare fees for families. Alberta and Saskatchewan have not yet agreed to extensions, and Ontario has an agreement in principle with the federal government, but they have not yet signed a deal. The Prime Minister and his Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Jenna Sudds, made the announcement from a childcare centre in the Ottawa suburb of Canada.
These investments have been historic, and the progress that we have made in just a short amount of time is truly, truly amazing. These parents have shared what it's meant to them, what it's meant to their families, their ability to get ahead, their ability to save for the future, and the ability to invest in themselves and their careers, returning to the workforce should they choose to, being able to pursue their hopes and their dreams in their careers as well. It's making a real difference. We've seen women's participation in the workforce reach all-time highs.
In other news, police say they have made more than 100 arrests and laid more than 300 charges in a major national child exploitation operation with the help of device-sniffing dogs. The announcement was part of an update from the RCMP and other police forces on a project aimed at protecting children from sexual abuse.
It's important that we don't miss devices, because missed devices means missed evidence, and missed evidence can also mean a missed victim that we would have had a chance to otherwise identify. So once the officers have completed their search, we bring in Harley, and then Harley tries to find any devices missed through scent detection. And our statistics so far in the last 2 years is in about 60% of our search warrants, Harley is finding devices that the investigators have missed.
Wow, way to go, Harley. Here in Alberta, Mounties say they have launched an investigation following a complaint regarding Alberta Health Services. Now, they won't provide any details, but the investigation follows allegations from the agency's former CEO that there was some high-level arm twisting and possible conflicts of interest and corruption. Athana Mentzelopoulos is suing the province for wrongful dismissal, saying she was fired in January for looking into the overpays on contracts with private surgical providers. Now, none of the allegations have been proven in court yet, but earlier this week, Alberta's Health Minister Adriana LaGrange defended her role in what's become known as the corrupt care scandal. She says the allegations against her are false.
I look forward to them being defended very vigorously in the statement of defense that will be coming out very shortly. I have always been a servant leader. In all of the things that I've done, long before I became an MLA, long before I was a school board trustee, as a mother of 7, as an active person of faith who was involved in my church and in my community and in so many different boards and committees, et cetera, that I've been on. It has been a huge honor for me to serve the people of Central Alberta, Red Deer North in particular. And I value the trust that the Premier has put in me to get the refocusing done.
Former Chief Judge of the Provincial Court of Manitoba, Raymond E. Wyant, was appointed as the lead of the third-party investigation into the procurement processes used by the Government of Alberta and AHS. The Alberta government says another $5 million would be added to help fund food security in this year's budget if it's passed. Since 2020, the provincial government has invested more than $31 million to help food banks and community organizations support Albertans in need. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says no family should have to choose between buying groceries and paying their bills.
But unfortunately, we know there are many Albertans across the province who are struggling to make ends meet and to put food on their tables. The people who need the support of food banks in our province may surprise you. With 1 in 4 households in Alberta experiencing food insecurity, many of these individuals are employed and earning a paycheck. These folks are our neighbors, our families, our children's classmates.
The proposed budget also dedicates $20 million for Alberta's school nutrition program to ensure no kid has to go to school on an empty stomach. And as of April the 1st, the Alberta Child Care Program will undergo significant changes, including the introduction of a provincially set daily parent fee of $15 a day for full-time early learning and care for children up to kindergarten age. The set fee applies to children who attend licensed child care centres and family day home programs during regular school hours. The monthly set fee amounts to just over $326 for full-time care and $230 per month for part-time care. The chair with Child Care Now Alberta, Susan Cake, explains how this new change will work.
All families will be paying $326.25. And so if you were paying over that, you're going to see a drop. If you were paying under that, then you were going to see an increase. And in some cases, that increase is going to be quite substantial. For Lethbridge, I mean, we're still struggling a lot with just filling spaces. Like, we're getting more spaces for all the children that are there. It would just be very beneficial if the government can actually address that and get spaces up to the number of children that we have so families can actually access them before doing this fiddling behind the scenes that they seem to be doing about making certain families pay more and certain families pay less. I don't understand what's going on because the parental subsidy is funded by provincial dollars. So getting rid of it doesn't seem as tied to the federal agreement as they're suggesting it is. And it would be great if local representatives in Lethbridge could offer some clarification on why this is the case here and not elsewhere.
Cake says the Alberta government intends to bring the $15 a day fee down to $10 a day by March 31st of 2026. And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made the rounds on American TV news shows to defend new alcohol rules. Smith says Canada must look out for itself in this tariff war with the U.S. Smith and other premiers said that they would stop buying American alcohol and halt contracting with U.S. companies in response to tariffs. Smith says her province will need to look at selling to other markets if the U.S. keeps its tariffs in place. Smith told CNN that American producers want Alberta's raw materials to create jobs and manufacture goods. She says she'd prefer to work with the Americans on increasing the amount of product headed south. Well, tariffs are finally in effect now, and interestingly, Premier Danielle Smith, who was big on diplomacy, now says she is fully supportive of the Prime Minister's retaliatory tariffs. To talk more about this is our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. He sat down with BCN's Paul Arthur. Take a look.
Well, you know, everything is so up in the air right now over the course of the day today. Premier Smith talking about what she was going to do in response to the tariffs. You had all these conversations going on about the United States perhaps reducing some tariffs. You know, it's really all in flux right now. And the interesting thing is yesterday, so Tuesday, the tariffs came into effect, and you'd pretty much every premier in the country, the exceptions being Premier Danielle Smith and I think Scott Moe of Saskatchewan as well, who immediately came out with their plans. A bunch of provinces provinces pulled American liquor from shelves. A bunch of provinces announced income supports for businesses affected by the tariffs. You'd really sort of robust, I would say, response from the other provinces, and Alberta and Saskatchewan sort of waited their 24 hours to see where everything shook out. One of the big criticisms of Danielle Smith over the last few weeks, couple months really at this point actually, is that she's been doing all this diplomacy in the United States, talking to her counter governors in other states. She was at Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago. There's this criticism that she was maybe sort of going rogue, not participating in this Team Canada response to things. And so it was very, very interesting to see on Tuesday when she put her statement out saying that, she fully sort of stands behind the Prime Minister. And so what gives? I mean, it's hard to say. My hunch is that there was this hope, I think, in Alberta political circles that this might be avoided. I mean, I think that hope existed in all political circles that this might be avoided. And, the rubber has hit the road, to use the cliche, and perhaps there is going to be a little bit of national unity for at least a period of time in response to these things. And especially because it is, as I say, so in flux. We don't know what's coming next. We don't know if things are going to change. We just have no idea. So and I don't think anyone has any particular insight. I mean, I don't think there's that much evidence that the Alberta government or the Ontario government has any different or better information than the federal government. So it perhaps does make sense for everyone here to sort of take a breath, take a step back, and sort of work on a unified response to this thing.
Yeah, at the time of this taping, we still haven't heard yet from Trump exactly, what kind of concessions may come today. He's hinted at, perhaps some carve-outs. So, would there be a carve-out for Alberta oil? I mean, who knows, I guess, and that would probably impact the way we respond here. To what degree will these tariffs impact the provincial economy? I mean, we're hearing some dire predictions, right?
Yeah, pretty significantly. In the budget last week, the Alberta government predicted, I think it was several thousand jobs this year, and then sort of 5-digit job numbers next year and the year after. I think the number that actually leaps to my mind is 2 years down the line is 46,000 jobs lost. So we're talking tens of thousands of jobs lost over the next 2-3 years if these tariffs stick around. Of course, they're interesting projections because there's no guarantee the tariffs will stick around, right? Even if Trump doesn't back down, we have midterm elections in the United States in 2026. If things go poorly in the United States economically, really good chance the Democrats take back both houses of Congress. And tariff powers actually are a congressional power. This is actually not a executive branch power in the United States. Donald Trump is using some sort of obscure kind of emergency act stuff, and Congress could actually amend legislation and put a stop to this today, in 15 minutes from now, if they so desired. So very good chance that we're not actually looking at tariffs 3 years down the road if the Democrats take back Congress next year, if the Democrats win the next presidential election. So, but all of that is to say it could be a very painful year, 6 months, whatever. And then, of course, there's whatever spending is done to sort of weather the storm, right? If we think back to the COVID years, massive government expenditures, helping businesses, helping individuals, a lot of that federal funding, to be fair. But of course, we don't know what that's going to look like because we don't know what the final numbers are going to be. We don't know how quickly some of the markets might pivot. All very up in the air. But I mean, at the end of the day, the prediction is more or less that this is going to be bad for Alberta and bad for Canada.
Yeah, again, no one wins in a trade war. I just don't think there's a winner. But now we haven't actually had a chance to connect with you since Alberta released its budget. You mentioned the budget here, so we're talking. I think it's a $5.2 billion deficit. It's big, but now there were some tax cuts as well. So do you want to just maybe share a bit of your thoughts on the budget?
Sure, yeah. So the tax cut's a really interesting one. This was promised in 2023. The UCP had promised during the election to create a new income tax bracket below $60,000 where the tax rate would only be 8%, not 10%. This will save the average working Albertan, I think it's about $750 a year. So, the average household, perhaps $1,500 a year if you've got, sort of 2 income earners is where the math works out on that. But it's going to cost the government about $1.2 billion, which, you just said the deficit's $5.2 billion. So it's not making up this entire deficit. But it certainly is blowing a bit of a chunk in the provincial government's budgeting. And you know what? I don't know if anyone anticipated it was going to come now. I think part of the reason why the Alberta government decided to go ahead with this now is if you can keep more money in people's pockets, that might lead to more spending. That might dampen some of the sort of recessionary effects of a trade war. But, I think that a lot of people had thought, well, the time to roll this out is actually probably 2026, 2027, right before a provincial election. So I think a bit earlier than people anticipated, both from a political, tactical side of things and also from an economic standpoint. So the big sort of top line numbers obviously are that deficit number, that $5.2 billion, the tax cut costing $1.2 billion. It's a pretty big spending budget generally, more than $70 billion. Lots of money going to cities. In particular, Edmonton is getting a huge injection of cash to do a downtown development just adjacent to the arena. An increase in education funding as well. I think about 4.5% more in education funding this year. And that's also offset by actually a pretty significant increase in the education property tax right across the province. So people will notice that on their tax bills, their property tax bills coming up. Now that's going to vary by municipality, of course. But, I think in Calgary, it's like an extra $390 or something like that for the average homeowner in Calgary. So big hits there. So you win some, you lose some in this budget, it looks like. But a very a tense budget, a budget that is making some cautious decisions. Not any really big spending cuts is the other thing that was notable here. Back in, must have been 2019, 2020, Premier Jason Kenney, they tried to sort of freeze the AISH budget. It's the insured income for the severely handicapped. Massive backlash to that. They de-indexed income tax, so it wasn't going up with inflation. Massive backlash to that. We're seeing some different decisions made this time around. And part of that, I think, is consciousness of this trade war. Part of that is consciousness that we're, believe it or not, only 2 years from an election.
Up next, we have the update on the fate of the Grassy Mountain coal mining project. Don't go away. Welcome back. The fate of the Grassy Mountain coal mining project is now at the hands of the Alberta Energy Regulator. After multiple hearings held in the Crow's Nest Pass and Calgary, the AER has 90 days since last Tuesday to make a decision on Northback Holdings' proposal. However, as BCN's Landon Hickok tells us, it's a much more complicated talking point than it seems.
The Alberta Energy Regulator has 90 days to make a decision on the Grassy Mountain coal mining project, as Tuesday witnessed the conclusion of a hearing at the AER's office in Calgary on Tuesday. Northback Holdings, the company proposing the project, says they only intend to kickstart exploratory drilling. Toxicologist Mandy Alsgaard says she isn't aware of any other time AER held a hearing for exploratory permits like this.
The hearing was novel. I've not experienced, I've never been a participant in a hearing on exploration and drilling permits. And going back, I actually couldn't find evidence that they've ever had a hearing on just an exploration permit. So that tells you how big of an issue coal development in the Eastern Slopes is in Alberta.
Northback has failed to answer questions. They failed to answer them at the hearing, and they failed to answer questions since they've been asked since June the 7th last year when I went to their meeting in Blairmore.
Even Alsgaard showed her disappointment after Northback refused an invite to participate in a panel discussion held at Lethbridge's Southminster United Church on Wednesday night. The panel held discussions between experts within toxicology, agriculture, and Indigenous groups, including Alsgaard and Spearman themselves.
It originally started off with a debate, and there was supposed to be representatives from Northback, so like coal company representatives from the Coal Association of Canada. I was hoping we would get an audience that was representative of, this area and people who are looking for jobs from coal mining, people who are concerned about coal mining and how that could affect their jobs in agriculture. And then I was notified by the organizer that there won't be anyone from industry or the Coal Association of Canada.
While residents of southern Alberta appear to hold various sides of the topic, ultimately the Alberta Energy Regulator will decide on the project's fate and Northback's proposal by June. For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
The city of Lethbridge is continuing to find ways to conserve water with the warmer months on the way. The city is requesting residents throughout the community and area to help in their efforts to conserve 20% of their typical water use. Once again, here's BCN's Landon Hickok with the story.
The city of Lethbridge is heading into their second year of their water conservation plan and strategy. As the population continues to increase in Lethbridge and as the city's water treatment plant nears capacity, Lethbridge is attempting to reduce 20% in water consumption throughout the city until the year 2030.
Because the potential drought that we were in, the drought that we were in, and the potential restrictions that we were looking at having to implement, the city actually responded really well to the voluntary mechanisms to reduce their water usage. And as part of that, we reduced about 15 or 16% from our water usage the year before, which is phenomenal.
The city's water treatment plant has an output capacity of nearly 150 million liters of water. Throughout the summer months, demand could surpass 130 million liters. The province announced in October of last year plans to expand the plant by an additional 30 million liters to 180 million.
We're going to do it in a couple phases. The initial phase is to build in some redundancy and a little bit of additional capacity into the system. And then we're going to look at building more capacity for the future. And then if needed, long-term vision is, again, to expand that capacity to be able to meet the needs not only just of the city, but more of a regional perspective as well. We are looking right now at the current upgrades in the next 2 to 3 years, and then the 5-year term, and then, like I said, that longer term vision is like 10 years out.
Reservoir levels are sitting at a much more higher position compared to this time last year. Snowpack from the mountains is just below normal levels, but greatly improved from this time last year. The city will continue to provide residents with regular updates on water conservation, current reservoir levels, and runoff forecasts.
In order for us to continue to grow, we will need to make sure that we have that water available.
From Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Coming up after the break, we chat with an economics professor about how Canada's retaliatory tariffs will make things more expensive for Canadians. And if you're watching us online, that full interview is available on our YouTube channel.